In medieval England, there were no cafes, restaurants, or nightclubs as we know them today. Instead, taverns served as centers of social life, where people from all walks of life, from peasants to knights, gathered. These were not just places to drink ale and have a bite to eat. Taverns served as post offices, labor exchanges, and sometimes even improvised courts and shelters. Unlike the austere monastery walls or cold castle halls, these places pulsated with life. Passions ran high, rumors were born, and deals were made. They had no neon signs or music blaring from speakers, but the aroma of malt, smoke, and human stories drew people in like a magnet. Their appearance, atmosphere, rules, and even their names could tell a knowledgeable observer a lot about the customs of the era and the real way of life, far removed from the grand chronicles. These establishments were an integral part of every town and village, forming an invisible network that connected the country. Within the walls of the tavern, social boundaries were blurred, at least for a brief moment, allowing people from different walks of life to meet, exchange news, and escape from their everyday worries. Watch until the end to find out why an ordinary hunting bag on someone's shoulder could determine the fate of people thousands of kilometers away. In medieval England, where literacy was a privilege of the overwhelming minority, a tavern sign was not just a decoration or a means of identification, but a critically important tool for navigation, marketing, and even cultural communication. Understanding its meaning was the key to unraveling not only the function of the establishment itself, but also many of the socio-cultural characteristics of the era. Taverns did not have names in the modern sense, John's or Rainbow Cafe. Instead, they used pictographic symbols and emblems that were universally understood, regardless of language or level of education. These symbols were often made as relief images, skillfully carved from wood, or bright, colorful paintings on large wooden boards that were hung above the entrance. The variety of images was enormous. They could be images of animals: red lion, white horse, bear and star, one of the most popular signs sometimes indicating membership in influential families, or objects such as plow, anchor, 3 crowns, sun, or moon. The choice of symbol was far from random and had a deep meaning. It could refer directly to the coat of arms of a local feudal lord or royal dynasty, emphasizing the tavern owner's loyalty and implying a kind of protection or defense from a powerful patron, which was extremely important for the reputation and safety of the business. For example, a tavern with a sign reading Red Lion often indicated a connection to the powerful House of Lancaster, while White Horse referred to the Saxon kings or influential families of Kent. This could not only attract supporters of a particular political force, providing them with a place of their own, but also, conversely, repel their opponents, creating an unspoken political zoning of the city. Moreover, some symbols were professional or allegorical in nature, indicating the specific nature of the clientele or a local legend. For example, 2 swords or shield could mean that the tavern was particularly popular among soldiers, mercenaries, or travelers, and possibly offered services related to weapons or military equipment. Plow and chains clearly indicated that the establishment served peasants, farmers, and probably offered lodging for draft animals. Anchor or ship indicated proximity to the port and a focus on sailors and merchants. An important aspect, the sign was often the only and most effective way for an illiterate traveler or local resident to instantly understand that this was a tavern where ale and food were served and what services it offered. At the same time, the quality and size of the sign could indirectly indicate the level of the establishment, its prestige, and the wealth of the owner. Rich, prosperous taverns had large, intricately carved, and richly painted signs, sometimes even with gilded elements or intricate carvings. Such monumental signs could be seen from afar, attracting more affluent customers. More modest drinking establishments may do with a simple wooden board with a rough drawing or even just a bundle of straw hung above the door. This ancient sign universally indicated that fresh ale was for sale, especially in rural areas. Sometimes, in order to avoid additional taxes that could be linked to the visibility and size of the business, or unwanted attention from the authorities, owners tried to make their signs as inconspicuous as possible, which of course affected their income and customer base. The sign could also serve as a place for official and unofficial announcements. Local sheriff's decrees, announcements of upcoming fairs, wanted criminals, army recruitment, or even lost items were posted here, turning it into a kind of public information board. Thus, these silent symbols were an integral part of everyday life, reflecting the social, economic, and even political realities of an era where every sign had a hidden meaning, accessible only to those who knew how to read it and understood the unspoken rules. Would you be able to understand the meaning of a particular sign in a medieval city? Or would you get lost in this multi-layered symbolism? Write in the comments. What surprised you the most about this? Leave your opinion. Medieval England, despite its picturesque nature, was far from modern ideas about hygiene and water safety. In this world, ale was not just a drink, but a fundamental part of the diet, surpassing even bread in importance in some regions and for certain social groups. Daily ale consumption was enormous. An ordinary worker engaged in heavy physical labor could drink up to a gallon, almost 4 liters, of ale a day, and sometimes more. Children and women were also given a weaker ale, known as small ale. The reason for such widespread and large-scale consumption was simple and pragmatic. Drinking water was often extremely unsafe. Water sources, rivers, streams, and city wells, were often polluted by human and animal waste and industrial effluents, e.g. from tanneries and dye works, leading to the widespread spread of deadly diseases such as dysentery, cholera, typhoid fever, and other intestinal infections. Unlike raw water, the boiling process required for the production of ale during the mashing stage effectively disinfected the water, making it relatively safe to drink. Thus, ale was not a luxury or a means of intoxication, but a necessity of life, a kind of liquid bread, and the main source of safe liquid and even calories. Ale varied greatly in strength and quality, which determined its purpose. Table ale was the weakest, with a low alcohol content, usually 1–2%, intended for daily consumption by all members of the family, including children and pregnant women, and served as the main substitute for water. It was so light that it did not cause intoxication when consumed in moderation. Common ale, which was sold in most taverns, was slightly stronger, 3–5% alcohol, and was the main drink for adult visitors. Strong ale or winter ale could reach 6–8% or more, and was intended for special occasions, holidays, or for those who could afford it and wanted a stronger effect. Various grains were used to make ale. Barley was the most common cereal, but oats, wheat, and sometimes rye were also used, depending on the region and harvest. It is important to note that hops were not used in early medieval ale in England. Instead, various herbs and spices such as myrtle, heather, ginger, coriander, wormwood, rosemary, and even juniper berries were added to impart flavor, aroma, and, it was believed, for preservation. This mixture of herbs was called gruit, and each brewery had its own unique gruit recipe. Hops became widely used in England only towards the end of the Middle Ages, around the 14th and 15th centuries, coming from continental Europe, and gradually replaced gruit thanks to its more pronounced preservative properties and characteristic bitter taste, which we associate with modern beer. Every tavern and even many households had their own breweries where ale was brewed on site, often in large wooden or copper vats. The quality of the drink depended heavily on the skill of the brewer, the cleanliness of the equipment, and the quality of the grain used. Tavern owners, alewives, often women who were responsible for brewing and selling ale, had to guarantee the quality of their product, otherwise they could lose customers and even face severe fines from local authorities or brewers' guilds. Ale was served fresh, often cloudy, straight from the barrel, as it was not intended for long storage and quickly turned sour. It also did not contain as much carbon dioxide as modern carbonated drinks. How much do you think the constant consumption of such quantities of low-alcohol ale, even low-strength ale, affected the daily life and working capacity of medieval people, especially in conditions of constant physical labor? And how did a system where ale was the main drink cope with hangovers and maintaining order among the population? Stay tuned, the most interesting part is coming up. Despite their apparent anarchy and free spirit, taverns in medieval England were strictly regulated by a series of laws and decrees issued by both local feudal lords and the royal authorities. These rules were designed to maintain public order, prevent crime, ensure the quality of goods sold, and control tax revenues, which were an important source of income for the crown and the lords. One of the most important instruments of control was the aforementioned assize of ale, which regulated the quality and price of ale throughout the country. These assizes, issued from the 12th century onwards, were designed to protect consumers from unscrupulous sellers and ensure price stability. Every few months or even weeks, special inspectors known as ale tasters, usually appointed by local councils or guilds, visited taverns. Their task was not simply to taste the ale, but to thoroughly check that it met the established standards of quality and freshness. They assessed the taste, color, density, and even the smell of the drink. If the ale was thin, i.e., weak, watery, or poorly brewed, or conversely spoiled, sour, moldy, or if the price per mug was higher than the officially established norm, the innkeeper faced punishment. The fines could be significant, imposed in the form of money, confiscation of poor quality ale, or even public humiliation. Unscrupulous merchants could be tied to a pillory with bad ale, or have a barrel of sour drink hung around their necks so that their shame was visible to all passers-by, which served as a powerful deterrent. In addition to the quality of the ale, the opening hours of taverns were also strictly regulated. They were usually allowed to operate from dawn to dusk to ensure accessibility for travelers and locals throughout the day. However, in some cities or during religious holidays, such as Lent or Christmas, strict restrictions or even a complete ban on the sale of alcohol and entertainment could be imposed. Nighttime gatherings were often associated with disorder, fighting, and crime, so the authorities tried to suppress them. Gambling was the subject of constant attention from the authorities in the church. Although some games, such as dice, were widespread and tolerated, many forms of gambling, especially those that could lead to rapid ruin and social unrest, such as high-stakes card games, were prohibited or severely restricted by royal decrees. Tavern keepers were required to report cases of fraud or large debts to prevent crime and conflict. The presence of law enforcement in medieval taverns was not what it is today. There was no regular police force in the modern sense of the word. Instead, order was maintained by constables, elected officials from among the local residents who performed their duties voluntarily or on a rotating basis, or by watchmen who patrolled the streets at night, ensuring safety and preventing disorder. In the event of serious offenses, such as a major brawl, theft, or murder, the local sheriff or his deputy would be called in to investigate. Innkeepers had a personal and often very strict responsibility for maintaining order in their establishments. They were required to actively prevent fights, theft, and other crimes, and to immediately report any incidents to the authorities. Refusal to cooperate with the constable or harboring criminals could result in the loss of a trading license, if one was held, heavy fines, or even imprisonment. Moreover, taverns often served as a place for officially informing the population about royal decrees, tax collections, announcements of army recruitment, or even for pronouncing sentences on local criminals. Evidence or even the criminals themselves could be put on public display here. Thus, the tavern was not only a place of leisure, but also an important element of the state and feudal control system, playing a key role in maintaining stability and law and order in society. In medieval England, a tavern was not only a place to drink ale and spend your free time, but also a full-fledged inn, especially for those traveling long distances. Their role was critical to the smooth functioning of trade routes and the movement of pilgrims, soldiers, messengers, and any other travelers who needed a safe place to stay for the night. Inns offered not only food and drink, but also lodging for people and stables for their horses and pack animals. It was a complex establishment, often quite large, divided into several functional areas. At the front of the building, directly at the entrance, was the common room. This was the heart of the tavern. It was where guests and locals gathered to drink ale, eat, play dice or cards, and, most importantly, exchange news and stories. In the center of the room, there was often a large open hearth, which served not only as a source of heat and light, especially during the cold season, but also as a place for cooking simple meals. The furniture was modest and functional. Long, solid wooden tables and sturdy benches designed to accommodate a large number of visitors. The atmosphere here was usually lively and noisy, filled with laughter, conversation, the clinking of mugs, and the smell of smoke and ale. Behind the common room or on the second floor, and sometimes in the attic, were the sleeping quarters. They were far from modern ideas of comfort and privacy in hotel rooms. Often these were dormitories, where several strangers slept huddled together on straw mattresses, so-called pallets, laid out directly on the floor or on simple wooden bunks. Privacy was minimal. Often the only dividers were thin fabric curtains or simply physical distance. The noise of snoring, talking, and smells, both human and from clothes soaked in smoke and road dust, were constant companions. However, for a weary traveler, even such a night's lodging was a great blessing, a refuge from the cold, wild animals, robbers on dangerous roads, and inclement weather. More affluent guests, such as merchants or knights, could count on a separate bed and sometimes a small, more private room, albeit without any special amenities other than perhaps a simple table and chair. The stables were the most important part of the inn. Travelers in the Middle Ages almost always traveled on horseback, mules, or with pack animals, and caring for them was an absolute priority. The stables were spacious, often located in the courtyard behind the tavern, protected by walls and gates. Here there was space for horses, supplies of hay, grain, and water, and, if necessary, the services of a groom who could clean the animals and check their health. Some large inns also had a smithy for shoeing horses or repairing carts, as well as a small vegetable garden or orchard to provide the kitchen with fresh produce. In addition to providing lodging, inns served other equally important functions. They were information centers. News from different parts of the country gathered here. Travelers could find companions for their journey, learn about road conditions, upcoming fairs, or the latest political events and rumors at court. They also served as places for concluding deals and informal negotiations between merchants. Tavern owners, innkeepers, often acted as local informants, brokers, or even, in a way, bankers, keeping small amounts of money or valuables for trusted customers. How safe do you think it was to keep valuables and money in such inns, where complete strangers slept? And how did tavern owners ensure at least some order and security with minimal control? What happened when a fight or argument broke out in such a crowded tavern, and how quickly were they resolved? Stay with us. There's more surprises ahead. The culinary offerings of medieval taverns, while not boasting the exquisite variety or sophistication of modern restaurants, were functional, nutritious, and perfectly suited to the tastes, needs, and means of the time. The diet consisted mainly of simple, filling dishes that were relatively easy to prepare with limited resources and could be stored for long periods or eaten quickly. As mentioned earlier, the main drink was ale, an integral part of any meal, served in huge quantities. As for food, the menu depended on several key factors: the size and prestige of the tavern, its location, urban or rural, as well as the season and availability of local produce, which greatly influenced freshness and variety. The most common and versatile dish was bread. It was coarse, often dark bread made from rye, barley, or oats, sometimes with wheat added if available. Bread served not only as the main source of calories, but also as a kind of edible plate, trenchers, for other foods on which meat, cheese, or soup were placed. After the meal, these soggy bread plates could be eaten by the poor or given to animals. Meat was a desirable but not always available delicacy for most visitors. It was usually served dried or smoked: beef, pork, lamb, venison, which was easy to store without refrigeration, or poultry, chicken, goose, also often dried. Fresh meat was a rare treat, except when the tavern was located near a slaughterhouse, a large market, or hunting grounds. Stews or pottage were incredibly popular because they were economical and allowed the use of small pieces of meat, bones, trimmings, and readily available vegetables, onions, cabbage, carrots, turnips, and grains, oats, barley, creating a nutritious, warming, and very filling dish. It was often a thick stew cooked in a huge pot over an open fire throughout the day, and then served in simple clay bowls or wooden bowls. The stew could be either meat or vegetable, and its composition varied depending on what was available. Fish was an extremely important source of protein, especially on the many fasting days when the church strictly forbade the consumption of meat. Fresh fish was served if the tavern was located near a river, lake, or coast, or salted, dried, and smoked fish, herring, cod, haddock, which could be transported over long distances. Various types of cheese and eggs were also on the menu, offering lighter snack options or additions to the main meal. Fresh vegetables were less common than today and were usually used in soups and stews. Spices such as black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were very expensive and imported from far away, so they were used sparingly, mainly in establishments catering to the nobility or wealthy merchants. Most dishes were seasoned with simple but effective ingredients: salt, vinegar, and local herbs, parsley, sage, thyme, which grew everywhere. An important aspect that strikes modern people is the absence of cutlery as we understand it. Forks did not appear in England until the end of the Middle Ages and were long considered a refined novelty, a privilege of the upper classes. Ordinary people ate with their hands using their fingers, and bread was used to pick food out of a common bowl. Simple wooden spoons were used for soups. The tavern owner, or innkeeper, usually offered one pot of food, which meant one serving of soup or stew, and then you could order additional bread and, of course, ale. In addition to the official signs, which were bright and obvious, medieval taverns had a whole secret or, at least, unspoken language of signs and symbols. This language was only understood by those in the know, or consisted of commonly accepted codes that are not always obvious to modern people. These signs could convey valuable information about available services, prices, even the mood of the community or hidden dangers, without resorting to written language, which was critically important in an illiterate society. One of the simplest and most ancient signs, already mentioned in the context of aleyevs, is the ale stake. It was a pole hung over the entrance to which branches, bundles of straw, a wreath of greenery, or even just an empty barrel could be tied. It signaled to passers-by that the tavern had fresh ale ready to drink. The height of the pole, and sometimes the number of branches tied to it, could tacitly indicate the quality or strength of the drink, as well as how long ago it was brewed. The higher the pole, the more attention it attracted, and possibly the higher the quality. More complex symbols could indicate the availability of certain amenities or services. For example, if a horse without a rider was painted or carved on a sign or next to a door, it could mean that the tavern offered not only food and drink, but also stabling for horses and possibly hay and grooming services. The image of a key or an open door on a sign or above a door could symbolize the availability of rooms for the night, which was extremely important for weary travelers. Some symbols associated with ecclesiastical or royal authority, such as a cross, crown, heraldic lion, or lily, could indicate that the establishment enjoyed special patronage, was under the protection of an influential person, or was a traditional gathering place for officials, judges, or royal envoys. There were also nonverbal signals that could be read from subtle nuances in the behavior of the innkeeper or other patrons. For example, if the innkeeper quickly poured ale without asking any questions when a stranger appeared, this could mean that the establishment was open to everyone and was not suspicious. If he asked a lot of questions, looked closely at the guest, or sent someone to check them out, this could be a sign of caution that someone specific was being sought, e.g., a fugitive criminal, or that the atmosphere in the tavern was tense. Moreover, some establishments might have used specific gestures, passwords, or phrases known only to regular customers or those in the know to indicate special, often illegal services or hidden goods. This could be a specific knock on the door, a special greeting, or even a special coin that served as a pass to hidden offers, such as high-stakes gambling or meetings with shady characters. Symbols on clothing or personal accessories could also play a role. A simple hunting bag on the shoulder could mean that a person was ready for a long journey and was looking for a tavern with stables, or conversely, that he was a hunter ready to sell fresh game, or even that he was a member of a particular guild. All these details created a complex but functional system of communication. How easy do you think it was for a stranger who didn't know this secret language and all its subtleties to find exactly what they needed without getting into trouble or being cheated? And what happened when such a secret language was broken or misinterpreted, leading to misunderstandings, conflicts, or even serious problems? The answer to this question is much more interesting than it seems. Stay tuned. Medieval taverns were not only places to eat and sleep, but also major centers of entertainment and leisure. After a hard day's work, whether in the fields or in the workshop, people sought a place where they could relax and forget their everyday worries. Games were an integral part of tavern culture, attracting visitors and stimulating ale consumption. The most popular games were dice and cards. Dice, made from animal bones or wood, were widely available and required only chance and luck. Cards, which came to Europe from the East, became increasingly popular towards the end of the Middle Ages, although they were expensive. Dice and card games were often accompanied by gambling, which could reach significant proportions. People bet their money, valuables, and sometimes even horses or property. This led to frequent quarrels, fights, and even murders, as the losers were often desperate and the winners overly confident. Tavern keepers often turned a blind eye to this, as gambling attracted customers and increased ale sales. In addition to gambling, other forms of entertainment were also widespread. Musicians often gathered in taverns. Minstrels, bards, lute, flute, or bagpipe players, entertaining visitors with songs and ballads. Sometimes puppet shows or acrobatic performances were held, especially in larger cities and inns located on busy roads. Storytelling and gossip were ubiquitous. The tavern was the main source of news, both reliable and fictional. The latest events in the kingdom, rumors about local lords, news about trade and harvest were discussed here. However, entertainment was closely associated with sin. The church condemned gambling, drunkenness, and debauchery, which were commonplace in taverns. Prostitution often flourished in low-class establishments, attracting customers from among soldiers, merchants, and travelers. Drunken brawls, fights, and sometimes more serious crimes such as theft, robbery, and even murder were not uncommon. The authorities tried to control taverns by imposing restrictions on opening hours, banning certain games, or requiring innkeepers to maintain order. However, given the lack of an effective police force and the widespread presence of taverns, complete control was impossible. Thus, the tavern was a dual place, a refuge from harsh reality, but also a hotbed of vice, where fun often turned into debauchery. Modern people often imagine brewing as an exclusively male profession, but in medieval England this was far from the case. Until the 15th century, ale production, especially for the local market, was predominantly a female occupation. These women were called alewives, which literally means beer wives or women who brew ale. They were an integral part of the economic and social structure of society, and their role in brewing was not just domestic, but also professional. There were several factors behind this dominance of women in the field. First, brewing was considered an extension of domestic duties that traditionally fell to women, such as cooking, baking bread, and taking care of the home. Ale was brewed mainly for family consumption, with any surplus sold to neighbors. Gradually, this developed into a profitable business. Secondly, women often had free time to brew ale between agricultural seasons or other household chores. Their knowledge of herbs and home medicine was also an advantage, as herbs were used to flavor and preserve ale before hops were introduced. Many alewives ran their businesses independently, without the help of their husbands, which gave them financial independence and a certain social status that was rare for women of that era. They could trade independently, manage their income, and even own property. The names of alewives often appear in court records and tax lists of the time as independent taxpayers. Their homes where ale was brewed often became the first taverns where locals came for a fresh drink. To indicate that fresh ale was ready for sale, alewives would hang an ale stake above the door, often just a bundle of straw or a branch with leaves, or in more sophisticated establishments, a special sign, such as a beer mug. This was a universally recognized symbol that everyone understood, even those who were illiterate. The income of alewives could be quite substantial. For many families, selling ale was the main or an important additional source of income, allowing them to improve their financial situation. Some alewives became quite wealthy, owning several houses or plots of land. However, their activities were strictly regulated by the local authorities. There were assizes of ale, laws that regulated the quality and price of ale to prevent fraud. Alewives were regularly inspected for compliance with standards, and if their ale was of poor quality or sold at inflated prices, they could be fined, publicly punished, or even banned from trading. This golden age of female brewers began to fade in the 15th and 16th centuries with the emergence of larger commercial breweries requiring greater investment and more physical labor, as well as the growing popularity of hoppy beer, which was associated with male work. Nevertheless, their contribution to the development of brewing and taverns was enormous, and their role in the economy and social life of the Middle Ages is still underestimated. In the Middle Ages, when there were no newspapers, television, or the internet, taverns served as the main information centers of society. They were places where news spread like wildfire and rumors were born and died over a mug of ale. For travelers, merchants, and pilgrims, the tavern was the main source of information about road conditions, weather, prices of goods in other cities, and of course, political events. Everyone who entered the tavern brought with them their own piece of information. A peasant would talk about the Lord's new tax, a merchant about the arrival of ships with goods from Flanders, a soldier about the latest battles and troop movements. This news passed from mouth to mouth often became embellished with incredible details and distortions, turning into rumors and gossip. It was in taverns that legends about heroic knights and the sinister conspiracies were born. But taverns were not only hotbeds of rumor, but also important centers of espionage and intelligence gathering. Royal agents, spies of lords, and sometimes even foreign scouts often frequented taverns, listening to conversations and gathering information. In a relaxed atmosphere, under the influence of ale, people became less cautious and could blurt out valuable information. Innkeepers, thanks to their position and constant contact with a wide variety of people, often had access to an extensive network of information. Some of them may have been secret informants for the authorities, passing on information about suspicious strangers or untrustworthy conversations. In addition, taverns served as recruitment centers. During times of war, recruiters could gather soldiers for the army here, offering them ale and a small fee for joining. Sometimes mercenaries or people willing to carry out delicate tasks could be found here. Thus, the tavern was not just a place to relax, but also an important hub in the invisible network of communication in medieval society. The information gathered here could influence political decisions, military campaigns, and the fates of individuals. The payment system in medieval taverns was much more complicated than the simple use of coins that modern people are accustomed to. Although coins, pennies, groats, shillings, were the main means of payment, they were not always available, and other more flexible forms of payment were in use, reflecting the economy of the time. A common form of payment was payment in kind. Peasants who had no cash could pay with the products of their labor: eggs, chickens, grain, vegetables, cheese, or even bundles of firewood for the hearth. The innkeeper, in turn, used these products to prepare food in the tavern or sold them at the market. This created a kind of barter system where each tavern became a micro-exchange center. Another form of payment was labor. Travelers who found themselves without money, or locals who wanted to pay off their debt for ale, could work in the tavern, help in the kitchen, clean the stables, carry water, chop wood, or perform other odd jobs. This system was beneficial to both parties. People received food and lodging, and the innkeeper received free labor. Credit also played a significant role, especially for regular customers. The innkeeper could keep track of his regular customers' debts by marking them on special wooden sticks with notches, tally sticks, or in simple ledgers. The debt was repaid later, when the customer had money or was able to pay with goods or labor. However, the credit system carried risks for the innkeeper, and not everyone was willing to provide it. Prices in taverns, although regulated by ale assizes, could vary depending on the season, location. Prices were higher in large cities than in villages, and the quality of the product. Different types of ale had different prices, and food was paid for separately. Tipping in the modern sense was not widespread, but it was customary to leave a drink for the host or offer to treat the innkeeper to a mug of ale as a token of gratitude for good service. Thus, the medieval tavern was not just a place to drink, but a complex economic hub where coins were only one form of exchange, and trust and mutual assistance often played an equally important role. Medieval taverns in England were much more complex and multifaceted establishments than we can imagine when looking at modern pubs. They were living, breathing centers of social life where the paths of all classes crossed, from wandering knights to landless peasants. These establishments served not only as places to quench thirst and satisfy hunger, but also as important hubs for the exchange of information, centers of entertainment, and sometimes even venues for concluding deals or even recruitment. Their appearance, organization, internal rules, and unspoken symbols reflected the entire spectrum of medieval society with its austerity and freedom, poverty and rare abundance, constant threat, and indestructible desire for celebration. The functioning of these establishments, with their specific water supply system, lack of modern hygiene, and peculiarities of payment and control, gives us a unique key to understanding the everyday life of that distant era. It was a world where ale was safer than water, female brewers held economic power, and a sign could tell a whole story. What do you think about this fascinating part of history? What aspects of medieval life, besides taverns, would you like to explore in our next episodes? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos.